Tom Hanks, a rare icon in Hollywood, a place where dazzling lights often swallow fragile souls, has carved his name deep into humanity's memory through unforgettable performances. The innocent yet unyielding man in Forrest Gump, the lonely survivor stranded on a deserted island in Castaway, and the courageous lawyer in Philadelphia, daring to confront the merciless cruelty of fate. For decades, he has stood as the very embodiment of kindness, the warm heartbeat in an industry far too familiar with coldness and pretense. Yet behind the immortal glory, behind the smile that has comforted millions of hearts, lie wounds that never truly heal. Long, cold nights that choke the breath. Moments when darkness surrounds him, clinging to his soul as if determined to tear it apart piece by piece. Now at 68, the man once thought to be invincible is still battling through some of the darkest chapters of his life. Pain refuses to let go. Haunting memories press in, and relentless illness strikes both him and his life partner. What he is enduring now may well be the most profound and defining chapter of his journey. If Tom Hanks's roles have ever touched your heart, leave a like as a gesture of tribute, to honor the kindest man Hollywood has ever known. Some hearts are born with cracks too wide for childhood to fill. Tom Hanks, born on July 9, 1956 in the modest town of Concord, California, entered the world without the cushion of a steady home. His father, Amos, worked as a wandering cook, earning just enough to scrape by while his mother, Janet, struggled to find her own footing. Money was scarce, and stability was rarer still. By the time Tom was only 4 years old in 1960, the fragile foundation of his young life collapsed. His parents' marriage ended, not with fiery arguments, but with a cold, merciless silence that left him gasping for certainty. That separation tore the family in two. Tom and two siblings went with their father, drifting from kitchen to kitchen, job to job, in a nomadic rhythm of survival, while his youngest brother remained with their mother. This wasn't just a divorce, it was the dismantling of the only world he had ever known. By the age of 10, Tom had already lived in 10 different houses, most of them cramped rentals with peeling paint, musty corners, and the faint smell of other people's lives lingering in the walls. Beds were borrowed, meals were sparse, and every new address meant another new school, another lonely lunch, another reminder that he was always the outsider. He wore the same clothes until they frayed. He learned to be grateful for whatever space he was given, and he perfected the art of staying out of the way. "I was a geek, an outsider," he would later confess. But those words masked a deeper truth. He had learned, far too young, that asking for love or stability only led to disappointment. His home was not a place, it was a suitcase. And yet, in the midst of this quiet poverty of money and certainty, there was one space where he felt seen: the stage. Under buzzing lights and dusty school auditoriums, he could slip into another life, a life where people listened, where applause broke the silence that haunted him. That applause was more than sound. To Tom, it was oxygen. But when the curtain fell and the lights dimmed, reality returned. Another unfamiliar room, another borrowed bed. Looking back decades later, Tom would describe his childhood with a single word: lonely. For a man who would one day become the very face of love, decency, and connection on screen, that word feels almost unbearable. Yet it was in those empty nights and restless days that Tom made himself a silent vow. If he ever found his voice, he would use it to make others feel seen, to shield them from the same aching invisibility that had shaped his own life. That vow, forged in the hunger for belonging and the absence of stability, would guide every role, every act of kindness, and every battle to rise above the shadows that never fully let go. Adulthood did not arrive as a rescue for Tom Hanks. It came as another kind of loneliness. In 1977, at just 21 years old, Tom stepped into the wider world carrying nothing but a battered suitcase, an old typewriter, and a fragile hope that he might somehow survive in a city that didn't care whether he existed or disappeared. After dropping out of Sacramento State University, he boarded a bus to New York, a city that looked magical on postcards, but up close felt brutally indifferent. Rent was steep. Rooms were tiny. Nights were colder than anything he had ever imagined. He shared cramped apartments with near strangers, sometimes sleeping on floors, sometimes on battered couches, sometimes wondering if this was how dreams began or how they ended. His pockets were nearly always empty, and meals were whatever change could buy. Casting calls became his lifeline, but most ended in silence. In interviews years later, Tom recalled walking out of auditions convinced that the directors didn't see a leading man. Only a skinny kid with a funny voice and no sharp edges. In an industry that rewarded swagger, his kindness felt almost like a liability. "I learned early on that the room didn't need me," he once admitted quietly, "and that's a hard thing to carry home at night." But the rejection didn't break him. It shaped him. Tom took every opportunity, no matter how small, strange, or humiliating. He played bit parts in off-Broadway plays. He acted in low-budget horror films like He Knows You're Alone, 1980, roles that paid just enough to cover the next month's rent. He worked backstage at the Great Lakes Theater Festival in Cleveland, building sets, hanging lights, sweeping the stage, doing whatever was asked. "Those years taught me everything," he later reflected. "You show up, you work, and you keep going, even if no one notices." By 1980, at just 24, his persistence opened a first real door, though it barely looked like success. He landed a role in the quirky sitcom Bosom Buddies, dressing in women's clothing so his character could rent an apartment. Absurd, short-lived. But to Tom, it was a tiny crack in the wall he had been pounding for years. Even then, fear never left him. Every time a job ended, he felt the same terror, that the dream would vanish and he'd be back on a bus, suitcase in hand. Looking back, Tom admitted those years weren't really about chasing fame. They were about survival. "I didn't have a plan B," he told an interviewer decades later. "I just knew I couldn't go back to feeling invisible." The invisible boy who had lived in 10 different childhood homes was still inside him, pushing him forward. Puchan telling him to stay a little longer on stage, to believe that maybe this time the applause meant he was worth keeping around. What looks now, in hindsight, like destiny, was in truth a daily act of endurance. A quiet battle fought in worn-out shoes, with scripts in one pocket and bus fare in the other. And it was that battle, fought in the shadows, that slowly shaped the man the world would one day call the kindest soul in Hollywood. The world eventually watched Tom Hanks climb from light-hearted comedy to landmark drama, and to the audience it seemed effortless, an almost magical transformation. From the tender wonder of Big to the searing honesty of Philadelphia. From the timeless soul of Forrest Gump to the raw solitude of Cast Away. Each role felt like another step upward, another proof that Tom was destined for greatness. But what the spotlight could not show was the toll that success demanded. With every performance that lifted him higher, something deeper was asked of his body, his mind, and his heart. For Philadelphia, Tom shed nearly 35 pounds, stepping inside the skin of a man living under stigma and wasting illness. The weight loss did not end when the cameras stopped rolling. He carried the chill in his spirit long after the set fell silent, a shadow that lingered. Forrest Gump brought a wave of global love, yet behind that warmth was a risky choice. Tom had traded a fixed $7 million salary for a share of the film's gross. It was a daring gamble that returned more than $70 million, a brilliant move that secured his fortune but also turned applause into pressure. Tomorrow was no longer just another day. It became a test he felt bound to pass. In Saving Private Ryan, he bore the weight of portraying war's trauma with restraint and respect. At the end of each day, the exhaustion he carried was not just physical, it was moral, the kind of weariness that teaches humility rather than pride. And then came Cast Away. Production was split so Tom's body could transform along with his character. Months of silence on screen carved a loneliness that seeped into his real life, a heaviness that didn't simply fade when filming stopped. Because isolation on screen leaves echoes off screen too, audiences saw triumph. Tom lived the toll. Fame did not grant him rest, it only demanded more. Endless schedules, tireless publicity tours, the expectation to remain forever, America's gentle everyman. There were moments when he described fame at its peak as feeling like standing inside a beautiful room whose door seemed softly locked. A haunting image of how success can comfort and confine at the very same time. There were nights when Tom asked himself who he really was once the camera stopped rolling, when the kind eyes the world adored were simply tired. Yet he kept faith with his craft. He kept preparing, reading, searching for truth. He chose roles that honored real people, real feelings, always leaning towards substance over spectacle. In rare reflective moments, he admitted that only a handful of his many films felt truly complete to him, a standard so high it was both painful and useful because it kept him focused on service rather than vanity. His summit never became a resting place. It was a narrow path that demanded discipline, purpose, and care. So he turned pressure into purpose, recognition into responsibility. He worked not just to entertain, but to leave people leaving the theater feeling a little less alone. That was his quiet mission, one the audience never saw, but always felt. Even at the height of his fame, clutching trophies and hearing ovations, Tom still carried the quiet ache of his younger years. Because long before the world celebrated him as a beloved figure, he had been just a frightened young man, longing for safety in the arms of love. And it was love, its confusion, its fragility that would shape his next chapter, one of heartbreak, regret, and redemption. Even as fame grew, Tom Hanks was still haunted by the fractures of his childhood. Above all, he feared repeating the cycle of a broken home. So when love appeared early, he clung to it. Not because he was ready, but because he was lonely. At just 21, Tom married actress Samantha Lewis. Within a short time, they became parents to Colin and later Elizabeth. Yet Tom himself admitted years later that he had mistaken fear for readiness and loneliness for love. He wanted desperately to build the steady home he never had, but his foundation was too fragile. The pressure of marriage, parenthood, and a career still in its infancy weighed heavily. His work demanded long hours and constant travel, leaving Samantha carrying more than her share of burdens. The cracks widened until by 1987, their marriage quietly collapsed. To the outside world, it was another Hollywood divorce. To Tom, it was devastation. The breakup wasn't just an ending. It was the shattering of his deepest promise to himself. He had sworn that the cycle of fractured families would stop with him. Yet here he was, watching Colin and Elizabeth live between two households, just as he once had. For a man already carrying the ghosts of a lonely childhood, the irony cut deep. On set, he often played loving fathers, men of warmth and steadiness. But when the cameras stopped rolling, he returned to empty hotel rooms and the echo of his own guilt. He later admitted the hardest sound was not the roar of applause, but the silence of being far away from his children when they needed him most. There were days when success tasted hollow, when a triumphant scene about family on screen was followed by a lonely dinner alone, knowing his own family was splintered. At times he would sit in his car rather than step into an empty house. The applause could not drown out the ache of absence. Yet even in the aftermath of divorce, his heart never fully closed toward Samantha. Their love had faded, but his care for her remained. Years later, when she was diagnosed with bone cancer, Tom quietly stepped back into her life, not as a husband, but as the boy who once promised to protect her. He covered her treatments, visited often, sat by her side, and held her hand as her health declined. But even then he could not repair what had once broken between them. All he could do was stay present, quietly carrying a sorrow he never advertised. Some failures live quietly in the heart, he would one day reflect, and all you can do is keep showing up with kindness, even when kindness cannot change the ending. This chapter was never meant for headlines. It was the story of a man who tried, faltered, and carried the cost. And while Hollywood saw only the rise of a legend, behind the curtain stood a father asking himself whether love by itself was ever enough. After the heartbreak of his first marriage, Tom Hanks carried a heavy fear that perhaps he was destined to repeat the cycle of broken love forever. But in 1988, a different kind of love entered his life. A love not born of desperation, but of patience. A love that would not only steady him, but stand with him through storms that fame, illness, and time could not shield against. That love was Rita Wilson. They had first met on set, as colleagues, slowly learning one another's rhythms, strengths, and vulnerabilities. Their connection grew not through Hollywood spectacle, but through quiet understanding. With Rita, Tom found more than a partner. He found a mirror to his own spirit. Someone who saw not just the actor, but the man. Someone who understood the regrets he carried and the fears he seldom voiced. Their marriage in 1988 marked the beginning of a bond that became one of Hollywood's rarest treasures, lasting not because it was easy, but because it was tested and refined by life itself. Together, they built a family, raised children, and stood side by side at premieres with hands entwined. To the world, they looked like balance itself. To Tom, Rita was home. But even the strongest love is not immune to fate. In 2015, their world was shaken when Rita was diagnosed with breast cancer. For Tom, the news cracked the very ground beneath him. The woman who had anchored his life, the person who had given him stability and warmth, suddenly faced a fight for survival. Rita underwent a double mastectomy and reconstructive surgery, a journey that demanded courage every single day. For once, Tom could not protect her. Fame, fortune, even his most cherished roles, all of it fell silent. There was only one role left to play: the devoted husband who refused to leave her side. He held her hand through appointments, whispered strength when her body faltered, and wept in private, terrified of a world without her. He later admitted in simple words, "She saved my life more times than I can count. The least I could do was stand by her side." That year, their home became a battleground, fought not with scripts or cameras, but with medicine, faith, and love. Rita survived. Together, they won that chapter. But the scars, both visible and hidden, remained. And with them came a new vigilance, a quiet fear tucked behind brave smiles. Because once you've stood that close to losing everything, peace never feels permanent again. Then just 5 years later, another storm arrived. In 2020, as the world fell into chaos, Tom and Rita were among the first global figures to test positive for COVID-19 while in Australia. For Rita, the illness struck hard, robbing her of taste, smell, and energy. For Tom, living with type 2 diabetes since 2013, the virus carried life-threatening risk. Suddenly, the man who so often played resilience became a face of human vulnerability in a global crisis. Headlines buzzed, but the fear was personal. Tom drafted quiet letters of farewell, just in case, while watching over Rita in an isolated hospital room. Their world shrank to four sterile walls, and yet, within those walls, their love proved unbreakable. He comforted her when she could barely sit up. He coaxed small smiles when exhaustion pulled her under. He kept a journal, sending messages of hope to the outside world even as fear pressed heavy on his heart. They survived that storm too. But survival came with change. Tom's body no longer recovered as it once had. Fatigue lingered, joints ached, and even simple walks left him winded. The charming man who once seemed invincible now quietly wondered if he might become a burden to the woman who had saved him so many times. And yet, through every hardship, their love did not weaken. It deepened. In one rare reflection, Tom said, "When two people walk through fire together, there's very little left to fear. Their marriage has never been about perfection. It has been about endurance, about showing up again and again when storms hit hardest, through breast cancer, through COVID, through chronic illness and the weight of fame. Tom and Rita endured not because it was easy, but because they knew exactly what it meant to lose everything. Behind the red carpet smiles and acceptance speeches stands a man who nearly lost it all, and a woman who refused to let him face the dark alone. Their story is not a fairy tale. It is a survival story, a testament to love that does not run when the night grows long. To the world, Tom Hanks was America's dad, a symbol of warmth, humility, and integrity. But no amount of admiration could shield him from the most painful reality of all, the struggles of his own son. Chester Chet Hanks, born into privilege and opportunity, carried not only his father's famous name, but also the heavy shadow of expectation. Instead of easing his path, that weight pushed him down a road filled with rebellion, substance abuse, and public controversy. For Tom, it was agony. He had spent a lifetime trying to break free from the chaos of his own childhood, vowing never to pass down the instability he once endured. Yet as he watched his son struggle, it felt as if history was knocking at his door, demanding to repeat itself. In 2015, Tom supported Chet quietly through rehab, clinging to hope that recovery might take root. But addiction is not a single battle. It is a long, grueling war. And the headlines did not stop. Angry outbursts, polarizing social media posts, even a lawsuit tied to a 2015 car accident involving a car registered to Tom and Rita. Reports claimed Chet had begged the other driver not to call the police, raising suspicions of impairment. Overnight, Tom and Rita's names, so carefully guarded from scandal, were dragged into legal messes they had no part in. For Tom, these weren't tabloid stories. They were wounds. He had built a reputation of integrity in an industry known for corruption, and now his son's name appeared beside words like lawsuit, addiction, and scandal. Chet himself would later call himself the black sheep of the family. A label Tom never spoke aloud, but one he surely feared in his heart. The questions tormented him. Had his fame blinded him to his son's suffering? Had his career's demands created pressures that suffocated rather than protected? Could love alone ever be enough to save a child who refused to be saved? And still, he did not turn away. He did not disown. He did not rage. Instead, he did what true fathers do. He stayed, quiet, present, waiting. Even when the weight of guilt and helplessness felt unbearable, he remained steady. Friends said Tom wrestled privately with the same fears every parent of a struggling child knows. The late-night phone that feels heavier than the hand holding it. The dread that one call could bring the worst news, fame and fortune could numb nothing. The ache of fatherhood cuts deeper than any review, sharper than any headline. Over time, Chet claimed sobriety. He admitted to the immense pressure of growing up in his father's shadow, of being compared endlessly, of feeling like he could never measure up. Recovery brought progress, but also scars, reminders that the road is long and fragile. For Tom, the experience confirmed a truth many parents know too well. Love cannot always save your child, but love must never stop trying. This was not a role with lines to memorize or marks to hit. It was life unscripted, where the stakes were not career-defining, but soul-defining. And though the world still saw a hero on screen, behind the scenes was simply a father, heartbroken, hopeful, and holding on. Even after decades of triumphs, Tom Hanks carries burdens too intimate for the spotlight, battles that do not make headlines, but weigh heavily with each passing year. In 2013, Tom revealed he had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, a condition he had unknowingly carried the seeds of for decades. Years of dramatic weight loss and gain for demanding roles like Philadelphia and Castaway had taken their toll on his body. What once was just physical transformation for art had quietly become a lifelong illness. Managing diabetes is not a role you can leave behind when the director yells, "Cut." It is constant, endless checks, strict diets, and the knowledge that one careless choice could tip everything off balance. And as age advanced, recovery slowed. Walks left him winded, joints ached. Fatigue lingered beyond reason. Yet to the public, he still seemed the same charismatic elder statesman smiling at fans, delivering jokes with ease. What people did not see were the needles, the carefully measured meals, and the quiet exhaustion of living with a disease that never ends. Behind the warmth of his public image was a man waging a private war, and aging itself carried its own shadows. Success, as glittering as it appeared, often left him feeling strangely alone. After the ovations faded and hotel doors closed, silence could be deafening. "Respect can become a lonely crown," he once admitted, describing the hollow drift that sometimes follows great acclaim. Perfectionism. The very trait that lifted him so high also weighed him down. He confessed to second-guessing performances, fearing not critics but irrelevance, the haunting thought that perhaps he was cherished only for yesterday while today slipped through his grasp. It is a fear sharper than any review, the fear of becoming invisible again, just as he was as a child. Perhaps the hardest ache came not from his own body, but from the echoes of history repeating. He had worked tirelessly to give his children the steadiness he never had, yet watched as Colin was measured against his father's silhouette and Chet battled his demons in public view. That guilt pressed heavier than illness, because no matter his fame, fortune, or kindness, he could not shield them completely from the fractures he himself once endured. His kindness, the quality the world celebrates most, sprang not from ease, but from wounds. He knows what it means to feel unseen, unwanted, and left behind. That is why he gives so much, to strangers, to causes, to those in need. Yet even generosity has a cost. A man who spends himself for others must find space to heal himself. And Tom rarely gives himself that permission, so he keeps going, quietly, with grace, with discipline, not asking for pity, not showing the weight. To most, he is still the smiling legend. But if you look past the applause, past the carpets and cameras, you see a man carrying burdens subtle, slow, and deeply human. Because this, too, is Tom Hanks's story. Not just the triumphs of cinema, but the quiet endurance of illness, aging, and the ache of fatherhood. A story that reminds us that even heroes grow tired, even legends carry scars. Today at 69, Tom Hanks lives with a kind of serenity that was not handed to him. It was earned, the hard way, through storms, survived, and lessons painfully won. His main refuge is a sunlit villa in Pacific Palisades, Los Angeles, a sprawling 14,000 square foot home, reportedly purchased for $26 million. With limestone lines, towering glass, and a resort-style pool deck, it is not just a mansion, but a sanctuary. A place where calm is not consumed by noise, but savored. Yet his sense of peace is not bound to California. Across the sea on the Greek island of Antiparos, he and Rita retreat each summer to a stone-built home overlooking olive groves and the Aegean's salt-kissed air. There, away from cameras and headlines, they live simply, walking, cooking, and reconnecting with each other and with nature. To Tom, that little corner of Greece is more than a vacation spot. It is a place where time slows, where survival transforms into gratitude. His marriage to Rita remains the cornerstone of his life, one of the most enduring partnerships in Hollywood. Strengthened by cancer, shaken by COVID, and tested by the everyday weight of fame, their love has not only endured, it has deepened into something unshakable. To the public, they are symbols of devotion. To themselves, they are simply two souls who refuse to let go, no matter the storm. As a father, Tom stays close to Colin, Elizabeth, Chet, and Truman, not as a judge, but as a compass. He beams with pride at Colin's acting career, respects Elizabeth's privacy, quietly supports Chet's continued sobriety, and encourages Truman as he finds his way. Each child has taken a different path, but Tom remains present, steady, and hopeful. Financially, Tom stands among Hollywood's wealthiest, with an estimated net worth of $400 million. But to him, wealth is a tool, not a trophy. From his legendary Forrest Gump deal, where he traded a fixed salary for a share of profits, ultimately earning over $70 million, to smart investments in property, including historic mansions, and even a nostalgic Bay Area houseboat, Tom has treated money not as glory, but as security. And with that security comes generosity. Philanthropy has become central to his life. He and Rita support cancer research, homelessness relief, veterans, and arts education. They give quietly to hospitals, schools, and organizations dedicated to dignity and opportunity. His kindness is never for spectacle. It is consistent, humble, and sincere. In recent years, his career has shifted too. He no longer chases roles or headlines. Instead, he chooses projects with emotional or cultural weight, films like A Man Called Otto, or his continuing collaborations with Steven Spielberg. He has also become a reflective storyteller off-screen, writing essays and short stories about history, character, and humanity. Perhaps the clearest signature of his later life is not fame, but calm. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of perspective. He takes walks with Rita, he laughs with fans, he drives himself through Los Angeles traffic in vintage or electric cars. There are no grand proclamations, no need to dazzle. Just a man who has learned, deliberately and gratefully, what endures. And what endures is not the applause, not the trophies, but the quiet daily choice to live with grace. When the lights fade and the applause quiets, what remains of Tom Hanks is not just a shelf filled with trophies. It is a way of being, a steady discipline of kindness, a daily practice of decency, and a humility that has outlasted the noise of fame. He has shown the world that greatness is not a single moment of glory, but a habit repeated quietly over decades. Integrity, to him, is not dramatic. It is deliberate. It is the choice to listen fully when others speak, to treat every crew member with the same respect as a director, to sign an autograph with patience even when tired. Those who have worked with him often say his influence is measured not in scenes filmed, but in calmer hearts and lighter days. He steadies the rooms he walks into. He reminds people that kindness is not weakness, but strength, one that can move more mountains than force ever could. And his impact stretches far beyond film. Through philanthropy, mentorship, and quiet generosity, Tom Hanks has touched lives unseen by the camera. He has supported hospitals, lifted communities, funded education, and inspired countless individuals simply by modeling what it looks like to be good, even when no one is watching. But perhaps his greatest lesson is deeply human, that scars can become maps instead of walls, that brokenness can give birth to compassion, and that hope is not naive when it is practiced with patience and discipline. Tom Hanks proves that the most powerful revolutions are not loud, they are steady, that true love is not found in perfection, but in endurance, that the gentlest courage practiced daily can outshine the brightest spotlight. In a world addicted to spectacle, he remains a quiet reassurance that goodness is still possible and still worth choosing. So if his work has ever steadied you, if a scene, a line, or even a smile once found you in a difficult hour, leave a tribute below. Tap the like button as a small salute. Share the moment when Tom Hanks reminded you that kindness is not just a dream, but a decision we can make again today. Because in the end, Tom Hanks's greatest role was never on a screen. It was the role he chose to live every day. A man who turned wounds into wisdom, applause into responsibility, and love into something unshakable. That is the true story of Tom Hanks, and perhaps the most important one of all.